Welcome to everyone here in the room too. Thank you so much for being here with us to really talk about business with a bang, which is social enterprise, one of my absolute passions in life. So if you're not in the right room, oh, sorry, but we are actually going to be talking about impact, and we're going to be talking about the impact you can create as a business owner. So I'm hoping that you're going to strap in because it's going to be a bit of a curly one. As Michael said, there's going to be some Q&As that you can answer in the chat room. So please avail yourself to that as we go. I'm very excited about this. I'm going to try and turn off my camera and then share my screen. And there'll be a little in and out as we go from screen to screen. So bear with me, hoping that everything will work beautifully, and we'll see how we go. Okay, so hoping that you can all see my screen now. Michael, can you just confirm?
Beautiful.
Excellent. So we are in the session Business with a Bang, Social Enterprise. So I am the CEO of the Queensland Social Enterprise Council. And first of all, as we start our session, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land which I'm coming to you from today, which is the Yuggera and Turrbal people. And this is not something that we say lightly at QSEC. Indigenous people and First Nations people from across the globe have been practicing really intentionally the principles of social enterprise since forever. So it is really important to us to state this up front. Social enterprise is not new. Social enterprise has been around, and the principles of social enterprise have been around for a very long time. We're all just starting to catch up, and we've got a lot to learn. So the Queensland Social Enterprise Council is a peak body. And we absolutely love social enterprises. We think that social enterprise is the gold standard when it comes to business with a purpose, or business with a bang, profit for purpose, or whether you're a not-for-profit. Social enterprise can be a really amazing business model for you to run your trade through and deliver the impact and create that purpose that everybody is really trying to strive for these days. So at QSEC, we do 5 things. We advocate very strongly for social enterprise as the business model for excellence. We support social enterprises by deeply listening to what their challenges, their problems, their concerns, and their opportunities are. We learn together. So not only are we imparting knowledge that we can find from our partners, but we also learn a lot from social enterprises. And then as they are adapting and changing, we try and help harness the peer-to-peer relationships that we build through our networks, through connection, and really help to bring together a movement for change. And we absolutely love social enterprise. It is our absolute reason for being. And we promote that and state that from the highest mountains. It's one of the things that we absolutely will die in a ditch for. It's fantastic. So what is a social enterprise? I noticed that we do have some social enterprises in the room. So bear with me, people, as I just explain this definition very quickly for those who have probably just heard this social enterprise term in the last little while. So like a normal business, social enterprises derive their income from trade. So it is really that trading parameters that we focus in on a social enterprise model. The difference is that social enterprises are a business with social, cultural, or environmental purpose at their DNA. And they've defined their business solution to really help drive that change they want to see for people and for planet. The other unique thing about a social enterprise is that they reinvest their efforts and their resources and their profits back into that purpose so that they can really drive the systems change that we are all really wanting to see. So it's not just a dollar or a small amount. They actually really lean into this space, and they want to change the systems that have really disaffected people and the environment for such a long time. So that's the difference between a normal business, a business as usual, and a social enterprise. I'm going to show a little story now. I hope you bear with me. I'm hoping that the audio will work.
So you want to change the world? What if you can? And it starts right at your fingertips. Every time you choose a social enterprise, you're making a difference. From coffee shops to law firms, technology to landscaping. Each social enterprise exists to to help solve a problem for people, for planet, for our communities. Let's change the world. Explore our stories and discover Queensland social enterprise. We are a Queensland social enterprise.
I am a Queensland social enterprise.
We are a Queensland social enterprise.
We are a Queensland social enterprise.
We are Queensland Social Enterprise.
Oh, it just makes me cry a little bit, just a little bit every time I watch that. It's really quite emotional for me when I see that. It's the collection of stories that we have on our website. And if you want to really delve deep into what social enterprises do, I encourage you to go to our website, find the QSEC stories page, and really discover what the diverse and amazing social enterprises are up to all across Queensland. Let's just talk a little bit about the business model. So social enterprises sit really fairly right in the centre of the traditional business model and traditional charity models. So let's go to charity, because the big misconception is that social enterprises are all not-for-profits or charities. That's actually not true. About 40% of our social enterprise members in Queensland have a charity, but they all run a trade-based enterprise from their charities. That is their social enterprise itself. Then we have, on the other side, we've got traditional businesses. There's a misconception that traditional businesses cannot be a social enterprise, and often we'll hear people get very surprised. You know, I'm not a social enterprise, I'm a traditional business. I actually run my business. I am a profit-based business, but because of the way that they have set themselves up, they are also deriving amazing amount of impact through their business model, and that pushes them toward this social enterprise model. You do get traditional businesses giving some CSR or corporate social responsibility sort of methodology behind their business practice. That's not a social enterprise. So just doing a little bit of donation does not make you a social enterprise. Making the systems change approach and actually donating or creating a large percentage of your resources and profits back into that purpose will create a social enterprise model. From traditional charity, just being a charity and having good outcomes and aims is not enough. In this day and age, we all know that charities are running very thin on the ground in terms of their resources. Often we now find that social enterprises are being formed through the charity models to increase revenue streams for charity businesses. So this is a really dynamic space. It's emerging very quickly. It's growing very fast as the pressures of environment, social and governance frameworks are being adopted, and purpose-driven organisations like B Corps are being more and more put into the mainstream practice. We're seeing a lot more of social enterprises coming along through our connections, which is very exciting. Many of our social enterprises will align themselves with the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, if you're not aware of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, again, I encourage you to really have a look at what these 17 unique principles actually mean. This is really the systems change approach that we're really trying to strive for through social enterprises. So if you have a good look at those, actually on our website and on the UN's website, each of these areas are explained in detail, and often what we'll find is social enterprises will attach themselves to 1, 2, or 3 of these sustainable development goals to really try and address in their own place-based way, or it could be a global aspiration that they have at the core of their business. But it's super important for you to be across this, because the SDGs, as we like to call them, Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are really coming fast. We do have a climate emergency. We have some really big systems problems about inequities that we're facing socially and culturally. And these 17 principles have been established by the UN to help us address what these problems are and how we might be able to move forward toward a more just and equitable society. So I wanted to give you a little snapshot into what this business model's like here in Queensland. We have some great partners in Social Enterprise Australia. They're the peak body for the national arm of social enterprises. And they've given us some big picture numbers that we can sort of try and wrestle with in Queensland. We're not quite sure if these are correct yet. We haven't really tested the waters in Queensland as far as research has gone. But what we estimate is there are around 2,000 social enterprises already established in Queensland. Now, that's not to say we're not going to uncover more of them over time. As people move towards this movement, I'm sure that this will grow, but that's what we can establish so far. There is a number that's been floated around, $3.84 billion worth of economic output that social enterprises in Queensland create, with an estimated 37,000 jobs being created in Queensland by social enterprises. And if we are to extrapolate that figure out, so if we know that social enterprises are returning a majority of their benefits back into the work that they're doing to solve their social, cultural, and environmental missions, we can average or estimate that potentially 1 in 3, so every dollar that's spent and driven through a social enterprise gets turned into about $3 returned back into the benefits for communities. We can expect that around about $10 billion are being returned to Queenslanders right now through social enterprise models. So it's not just a small thing that we're talking about, it's massive impacts that are happening all across our state and across the nation. So about 60% of our social enterprises are based outside of Brisbane Metro Centre. So this is really important to note. The regional areas is where we're seeing a lot more action in terms of social enterprises building economic resilience for regional communities. And that's a really important distinction to make. We've got a lot of people here based in Brisbane, but there is by far and away a lot of growing networks and businesses happening in each of the regional areas that we work in. Another really interesting point to make is that over 50%, it's somewhere between 50 and 60, depending on what day of the week you're looking at our numbers in terms of membership, but about 50 to 60% of our organisations are women-led. This is very, very unique. In business as usual, it's around about 35% are women-led. So women are by far and away lifting this burden for our social and cultural advantage. And 10% of our members are Indigenous businesses. Now, this is extraordinary when you think about 1% of business as usual is representative of the Indigenous business sector. So we have a lot of Indigenous businesses. And as I said at the start of this, we know that Indigenous business and First Nations people across the globe have led this for a very long time. So it shouldn't be surprising, but it is extraordinary for us to note that. So, am I a social enterprise? We get this a lot. Again, there is quite a bit of flexibility in that definition, and some people will go, yes, I'm definitely a social enterprise, and they'll take our survey and then find out maybe they're not quite there yet. And then sometimes they take the survey and that, to their surprise, they'll actually go, oh my gosh, I am a social enterprise. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen again for a minute, and I'm going to then pop out to this other little video that I have prepared for you, and it's on our website. I'm really hoping that you'll go to www.qsec.org.au and have a good look around our website, because there's some extraordinary resources that we have collated there. So I'm going to see if I can play this one for you again. I hope the technology works for me. And you can have a little listen to what impact and impact measurement and the Sustainable Development Goals can really do to lift and drive your business.
Impact is really vital to a social enterprise. It's the reason that we do the business, is to create impact.
Impact means, how do we use some sort of vehicle to tackle an existing problem, whether it be social, cultural, environmental.
You can use business for a broader purpose than just profit.
So it doesn't matter if you're for profit, it doesn't matter if you're not for profit. We're not so much interested in the form or the legal structure that your enterprise takes. It's more about what outcomes are you actually providing to society or the environment or culturally.
And when there are so many things that we want to address in our communities, The Sustainable Development Goals, so the SDGs that were developed by the United Nations and are a kind of global set of goals for everybody to achieve, they are a great place to start and to explain what it is that your social enterprise is really trying to get some results in.
And I remember I bumped into one of my ex-employees just not long ago, actually, only a year ago. And I asked him about the impact that working for Seed, this enterprise used to run, had on him and his community, the Sudanese community. And he reeled off a whole list of names of people that had come to work for Seed. It was their first job in Australia after arriving as migrants or indeed as refugees. And they went off and got employment in the open employment market simply as a result of gaining that experience at Seed.
Well, social enterprises exist to deliver impact. So the practice of impact measurement is critical. It would be like running a business without having a profit and loss or a balance sheet.
And ultimately, we need to be asking, are people better off by what we are actually doing?
We collect data like every year alongside our annual report. I collect really basic data like how many hours of employment were created for people with a disability or people from refugee backgrounds, how many new jobs did we create, how many dollars did we pay to members with a disability in relation to other staff in the organisation. So we chart that year to year.
You know, at the moment, there's a recidivism rate of over 46% in Australia. It's a huge global problem, not just in Australia, but it actually costs over $110,000 a year to keep just one prisoner incarcerated. So, you know, when you start multiplying that and you look at the numbers, it is insane. So far since we've been operating, our recidivism rate sits at 2%. So, you know, we've made a huge difference in a very short time.
You know, if I was backing a social enterprise, I'd want to see some hard data. I'd also want to see some qualitative data and talk to people about the impacts of having a job. And I'd want to see people opening themselves up to external review, basically.
So if you want a successful business, you have to prove that you're also successful in impact.
So a theory of change is really just trying to explain why you think your activity, your product or services is creating some change. Not just an output, which is a transaction. Somebody might be buying something from you or coming for a service. But if you believe something is changing, like self-esteem, quality of life, economic well-being, any of those changes that you believe or aspire to be achieving through your enterprise, then somehow you need to explain what you think is occurring. Theories of change do not have to be complicated. In fact, they can be quite simple because they help to explain the change that is occurring, and really then just talking again with beneficiaries, with our stakeholders, with our team about why we think that's happening, and then documenting it. That's all it is. And
So that gives you a little snapshot into what we're about to discuss next, which is what is this theory of change? What is impact? What does it mean when we actually make that impact, and how are we looking forward to the years ahead and really helping to change those global goals and the Sustainable Development Goals? So we're about to launch into some pretty intense masterclass really on what is a theory of change, what is a business model candor for a social enterprise, what does it look like to start measuring your impact, and how can you actually start shifting the needle in even small ways toward those global goals. As we look at this next 10 years, why on earth would we measure? Well, we know that there's some big economic challenges coming up right now in the next couple of months to years. There will be some pretty hard decisions being made about where money's being spent and how money's being spent. If you're a business and you're operating in any way, shape or form, you need to start addressing what is the impact your business is creating, not just from a dollar perspective, but from an impact perspective. We already have businesses trying to catch up with the sustainability movement. That's already happening. People are trying to get some efficiencies through their energy usage, through driving their carbon down. But really what's happening is we're starting to respond to the ESGs, the environments and social governance frameworks that are emerging. And these things, I believe, will be really mandatory in the next 10 to 20 years. People will need to start mandatorily responding to what their ESG benefits are. And the impact model that we're showing you today will help you to guide some of those conversations. Now, we've already got some CO2 carbon credits looking like that zero carbon emissions are coming down the track for 2030. It's a very essential part of addressing the climate change issues, but it's only one part of the environmental issues that we're facing. So I'd encourage you to think broader than sustainability and carbon emissions. I'd encourage you to start thinking about the ESG compliance regulatory frameworks, as well as what impact we're making toward the global goals. This is going to be critical in the next few years, particularly in Southeast Queensland, as we start to move toward the Olympics. ESG frameworks will be applied, I believe, to some of the procurement strategies going through the Olympics. So again, this is a great launching pad for this, but really our ultimate goal is to drive forward a sustainable and just and equitable society going forward. So why are we measuring impact? Well, there's two thought leaders in this space. One said, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And the other one said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I like to put two of them together. If you can't measure it, you probably can't manage it. And things that you measure tend to improve. So if you just go along doing your own thing, if you're not aware of the parameters and the scope of what you're trying to change in the world, things will just keep happening and things may not improve. But if you really look at the framework and say, I really want to tackle this problem, this issue, how do I measure this? How do I move forward? How do I create the right inputs and the intentional design for my business to make sure that these big systemic changes actually do improve? And also, what is your why for your business? You know, if you set out your business to just make money, you'll find that you are not going to engage and attract and retain people who are working for you, particularly this next generation. You're going to need to articulate what is your reason for being to attract the younger generation coming through. They want to attach themselves to businesses that are providing a purpose. So you need to really address that if you're wanting to attract and retain people. Also, in a market and a consumer market that's overgrown and overflooded with options, your unique value proposition is really important. And this impact statement will really help you to define what your unique value proposition is to your market. So how do we measure our impact? So the first thing I'm going to cover off on is what to measure. So you're going to need to have a look at your cost of actually making the impact to the benefits and seeing if they're going to outweigh each other. So if your profit's coming through and you're a business that's been set up for impact, you're going to need to look at how much of that impact is costing your business and making sure that it balances out and outweighs, the impact benefits outweigh the costs to your business going forward. One of the tools that you can use to actually define this and create that for your business is called a social business model, Canva. Now, there's lots and lots of different models, and this is actually a really complex but very simple at the same time template that you can use. It will take some time to work through it, and lucky for you, QSAC has already got quite a few resources online that you can walk yourself through. You start with how your business model actually is going to derive an impact, really, and then weigh up the costs of that impact, the commercial quality and environment that you're working in, and also what revenue that you can derive from the business that you're creating. Step by step, you can fill out one of these as simply or as complicated as you like through the training and development portal that we have online, and you can build your own social business model, Canva. That's really somewhere that you should start with to make sure that your business is capable of delivering the impact that you want to create. Another thing you need to assess is who. So that means who are the people you're serving, what's the environmental issue that you're trying to solve, and what's the cultural issue that you're trying to address. This is another model. There's lots of different models out there. This is a logic model, that they call a logic model. You can create, like they said on the video, a theory of change. And again, it's a much more complex piece of process that we're going to be able to have time to cover off on today. But the basic premise is that you set up your social problem that you're trying to solve at the forefront. Then you work through what's the impact, the ultimate impact of the strategic work that you want to achieve. And then you work backwards from that. So if you're going to have that impact, what outcomes, what are the signs that we're going to see that to say, yes, I am actually impacting this. I can actually create the change I want to see. And these are the things that will be indicators for me to actually make sure that I address those things. How are we going to measure those success outputs, the outputs that Ruth Knight was talking about? What's the project and the initiative that I'm going to drive? And what are the processes to get there? So you can work all the way back to the resources that you need to create to make sure that your people, places, and the funding allocations are going to match and align with the direction you want to take your business in. Now, again, I've just brushed over this really super quickly, but there is a great deal of support out there. You're not alone when you start to think about your theory of change and your business model Canva. There are lots of people in our social enterprise space that can help you. And ultimately, what you want to have with both of these documents is that they talk together. So your business model canvas will actually inform your theory of change, and your theory of change will inform your business model canvas. And these two documents can be quite flexible and adaptable and iterative. So when you're working through your model and you're starting to collect your measurements, so this will help you to define what you're actually going to measure and how you're going to quantify it. When you start working with these models, you'll be able to see whether the inputs that you're doing are actually affecting the change that you want to see. So that continuous improvement will actually be addressed as you work through these. When you start to measure it, you can say, actually, it's not doing what I thought it was going to do. I can change some of the inputs or the processes or the outputs to be able to help us to define what outcomes and impact we want to create. So how and how much? So how are we going to measure and how much are we going to measure? So this comes down to what is your baseline? What does success look like? What are the timeframes and criteria that you want to set for your impact measurement? To try and get a baseline measurement, that's to start off with, how do we know what the conditions are in my particular field of interest? So for instance, if it's something to do with homelessness, you might have a look at some of the market data around social housing. You could have a look at some of the industry data. You could have a look at some demographics. But really, when you're first starting out, what you really need to do is look at the cohort that you're going to work with. So if you take homelessness, for instance, if you're looking at a place-based arrangement, you'll have a look at where you are, how many people are homeless, what are the services already existing, and then have a look at see what's actually being measured now. Are there people actually moving towards social housing right now that you can start to add up? Only 3% of people get places within social housing. You can start to define what it looks like right now. This baseline measurement will help you assess whether you're actually improving the outcomes. So this is a very important first step for when you start measuring your impact. I would say to start with your cohort. Have a look at some of the demographic or market or industry data to help you inform what direction you're going to take, but really start with that cohort and see what's actually happening right now. There are lots of different ways that you can actually start to collect data. So once you've got your baseline, there's some time-based and comparative measurement tools that you can start to use that really helps you to inform how you're going. So that baseline data that you've got, you can maybe do some surveys, do some interviews, do some observations, look at the data sets, include the scales and measurements that you can find, and then you set a time frame for yourself. So in 6 months, our program should have reached X, Y, and Z. Now let's redo some of the data measurement tools to see how we're going. And this is your iterative measurements that you can start to see, is what we're doing actually working? So what is your contribution and your designed intentions to that outcome? Now, you can see that if we take the homelessness example again, so social impact measurement is a process and framework for measuring and attributing positive social change to an organisation's designs actions. I'm going to look at MICA projects. If you know that MICA exists here in southeast Queensland, and they really focus in on just around the West End area and just a little bit beyond that, and really trying to look at Brisbane and seeing how they can help make change within that local area. They're very place-based. So from the data, we can see that there's 9,700 people suffering from homelessness in Brisbane. So that's your big picture. Every year, MICA project sets about measuring what it is that their programs are actually doing to change this. So they set themselves some goals, and then they go and do surveys. They have meetings with lots of the other peak bodies, and they start to have a look at what are the conditions that we need to provide to help those homeless people move from a rough sleeping to a street to home model. So through their street to home model, you can see some of the data that they've collected. They've supported 494 rough sleepers through those programs, and they've accessed a temporary accommodation and permanent housing. So they're starting to collect that data so that they can help demonstrate what they're doing on the ground. Then they've got Hope Street Cafe, and some of those, this is their social enterprise. Some of the outcomes that they're trying to achieve through the running of the cafes to provide nutritious meals for those homeless people or people at risk of being homeless. So they've counted the meals that they've provided. They've also started to look at the employment model. So how many people have they taken through their employment and training, and how many people have graduated? And then they're looking at further on down the track, how many people have gathered or graduated and found employment elsewhere. So they can see that they're actually meeting their expectations for change in this particular data set. So there's lots of different ways to measure, and I've put a few of them down there. So there's a social return on investment, principles for responsible investing. That's a global model. That's alongside global initiative standard, which is quite interesting at an accounting level. What I've talked you through a little bit is the logic models, and that's often where people start, is the logic models with the theory of change. But there's also this quite a lot of excitement about impact-weighted accounting. Now, it sounds really boring, but this will be a game changer for accountants to actually help you measure your impact through your annual reports. So we're looking at that quite closely at the moment as a global shift. Accountants are actually weighing in quite heavily to this space and looking at how they can qualify some of the impacts that are being created through annual reporting.
Elise,
but
can I just butt in? Can I just butt
yeah.
in for a second?
Yeah.
I apologise. I'd just like to let everyone know that there is a Q&A chat function in the top of the ribbon. If you want to put your questions and comments in there, I've noticed there's a few coming through the chat, but we really would like to capture your questions in the questions and comments in the Q&A button. So thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Good point. But with all the weight of how you measure and what you're measuring, really it comes down to this very basic model. What are your inputs? What are you actually doing on the ground? What outcomes are you trying to achieve? What are the impacts? And how much are you actually changing this? So going back to the MICA projects, so their causality, how much are they actually contributing to that? They can map because those people are coming through their programs. But what they couldn't probably claim is that, for instance, the government's changed their policy and they've opened up 500 new places for social housing, and 300 of those people have been placed through that model. They can say that that's a great outcome because they've referred them, but they actually haven't built the social housing. Or if there was a big policy change that came down the line and then created small, tiny home allotments on people's blocks, they actually didn't cause that. That's not a causality that they could claim, but they can claim the referrals through to those programs. So how much would happen anyway, and what is your contribution is really what you need to measure at the end. So the last one is risks and unintended consequences. And there are 3 types of unintended consequences that we refer to when we're talking about impact measurement. First one is direct and immediate consequences that are different from what your intention was. I'm going to give you an example here. Through COVID, we obviously had lots of lockdowns, and businesses had to close their doors quite quickly. So in order to save people or protect people, businesses like Vanguard's Laundry or Nunda Co-op needed to close their doors quite quickly. And within a day or two, they were saying, don't turn up to work. We need to protect you. The surprising immediate consequence of that was a whole bunch of mental health issues, completely different to what was intended. I think Nunda Co-op came to work just to do some stock take the very next day after COVID lockdowns were announced, and they found a whole bunch of workers who'd been working with them for years, had turned up and said, I don't have anywhere else to go. I'm scared and I really need support. So the direct and immediate consequences was completely unintended. That was meant to protect people, but in fact, it actually really cast them adrift. So that's one of those sorts of things, the perverse or indirect consequences that are the opposite of what is intended. I would like to very squarely put a finger on carbon credits and offsetting carbon credits. The direct and the perverse and indirect, or actually sometimes direct consequences in the opposite direction, is that people are buying carbon credits and still polluting the earth terribly. So I think there's got to be some changes around the policy to carbon credits and carbon offsets if we're not going to have these perverse opposite actions occur from carbon offsetting. So that's something that we really need to watch, is making sure that our actions are not having direct or indirect perverse actions, perverse consequences to our actions. And then the last one is unintended consequences that have not been foreseen. And I want to point to the Yellowstone National Park. They actually, in the 60s and 70s, decimated their population of wolves. And they had thought that by decimating the population of wolves, they would have lots of little critters and that the ecology would survive and thrive because there were no big bad wolves coming to attack everything and eat everything. What happened that they could not have predicted was a collapse in the ecosystem. And they have been reintroducing wolves back into the environment to actually help repair the ecology and the biosphere that was ruined by those actions. So that was completely unanticipated, but they are hopefully well on the way to mending that. So there's cautionary tales for anyone embarking on impact there. So some of the tips and tricks for impact measurement, and I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Success is often non-linear. So it's all very well and good to write your theory of change and say, these are the outcomes I want to achieve at the end of this time. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's non-linear. Sometimes you'll actually reinvest and say, we need to go in a different direction. We've picked up on something that we hadn't quite been aware of. So you need to be flexible and adaptable and see how you're actually impacting your cohort, impacting the environment, and change as required. So it's often non-linear. I know that Vanguard's Laundry set out to actually have all of their cohort get off smoking. That was one of their stated outcomes that they really wanted. But when they actually talked to their stakeholders, they realized that this is not going anywhere. They put in all these non-smoking campaigns to try and get everybody off the darts, but it just wasn't working. They had to go back to their stakeholders and say, well, why is this not working? You know that smoking's bad for you. How can we change it? And they said, we don't want to stop smoking. This is actually the only thing in our lives at the moment is giving us joy. And so there's going to be a lower, slower process to get them on the healthy trail that Vanguard's Laundry really wanted them to do. So they took it off their impact statement and they readdressed it through their stakeholders, which was really key for them. Who will be measuring? So this is something that people often overlook. So if you start to set down timeframes that what you want to measure and how you want to measure it, you better be sure that somebody's going to be able to go ahead and do those things. Who will it be in your organisation who'll be doing that measuring? Is it simple? Can you make it as simple and as easy as you can? Because it can get quite costly to pull somebody off their job to go and do some of the surveys and the interviews that's required. So less is more when you're starting out for impact measurement. Really consider what the cost will be to your organisation. Testing your assumptions with those who you're intending to work with. So you might assume that as our friends in Africa decided that they were going to put wells in, and the wells were going to be formed as toys, like roundabout toys and things that kids could play on to help with the pumping of water. What actually happened was when they designed it, it was too heavy and the kids were not in a playful mindset when they were gathering water. So they actually ended up spending a lot of money assuming that this would be great for kids to go and play to gather water. It actually did not hit the mark at all, and they wasted a lot of money. They could have just gone with a co-design approach and tested those assumptions with the people they were intending to work with. Evaluation for continuous improvement. So every time that you go through these processes and measure, you need to ask yourself the question, is it working? And then adjust your plan to make sure that you are creating that impact that you want. Celebrating your wins is very important. So often we'll encourage social enterprises to have an annual statement on their annual report, or to have, like Malthana does very well, in their socials when they reach a certain hour of workers who are Indigenous hours, they call it Indigenous working hours. They celebrate that on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and they really help. It really helps to amplify what they're doing, because that point of difference can be discovered by others who are wanting to purchase from them. The other bits and tips and tricks is that networks help. So by joining something like a QSEC or business network that are really invested in that impact space really help, because you can share ideas. Start small and simple. Look for examples of the best practice to copy. So there's lots of people who've already done this before. So you don't need to feel like you're on your own. You can actually, by being part of those networks, copy and examine others who've gone before. And there's lots and lots of different help out there. So not just the QSEC website, but Social Traders has a certification process that can really help you on your journey to discover what exactly you need to do in order to be a social enterprise. Universities are really fantastic. There's lots of courses, Central Queensland University, QUT, Griffith University. There's lots of them who have mini courses, and they're developing micro credentials to help people adjust to impact measurement and to create the impact that they want. And then if you're not quite a social enterprise, you can join QSEC as an associate member and gain access to all of those resources through us as an associate member. So there's lots of ways that you can help yourself on this impact journey. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Camera back on, I think. Yay. Oh, all right, so that was 47 minutes. Are you all okay? And are there any questions?
That was fantastic. So I've got a question or two here that I might start with. So this is a question around, where does a social enterprise, does this particular social enterprise, where does it sit on the spectrum? So it's a business with a desire to drive innovation in healthcare to be affordable, timely and accessible for all, so that we can be on the front foot and finally focus money and attention on maintaining health and well-being and preventing illness and disability. It's a business that's established through collaboration and partnerships with the health and education sector, and hopefully ties in with social enterprise. So where does that sit on the social enterprise spectrum?
So I guess the questions you need to ask yourself is, obviously you're trading. So this is good. This is number one. Make sure you have a trade. The next thing is, have you defined your purpose and what are your goals? Like, you know, through that theory of change, if you said that you wanted to change something, is your business aligned with that change model? And what are the inputs and your activities in order to get that? Are you measuring how you're actually changing those things. So it's great to have an intention. I want to do this amorphous thing, like I want to save homeless people. You know, as an example, we'll go back to Micah so that we, you know, can focus on something tangible. If you just put it out there, I want to help homeless people, how? How? If you want to change the health environment, how? Is it the whole health environment? Is it just an aspect of it? You need to articulate it, and then you need to have a plan about what your contribution. So you can't change the whole of the SDG, but you can change your part in it by stating, this is what we want to see different. These are the things that are broken, that things that are not working. This is how we want it. This is what we need to have change. And these are the steps we are intentionally designing to change them. Then that last bit is, how much are you investing in that? So everybody makes profit. Every business, every trade, you need to derive a profit. If your profit margin is, I don't know, X amount, you're going to have to look at how much you're actually investing in terms of profit, your resources, and your embedded impact. How much of that is actually making a difference? If it's closer to 50%, then you're a social enterprise. If you're just 1% or 2%, you're probably a really fantastic business who's doing some really great work. You might try for B Corp status, for instance, or just promote the things that you are doing and be a profit for purpose, fantastic organisation. We want every business to do that. But you may not be the gold standard social enterprise until you can actually start to quantify about 50%, a good portion of your profits and your resources and your energy are going back into solving that problem. And in fact, the FACES report, the FAS, Finding Australian Social Enterprises report, the FACES report from 2016 stated that about 80% of social enterprises are reinvesting 100% of their profits back into their cause. So that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. So that's the three things that I'd ask you to check on. We've got a little survey on our website, Are You a Social Enterprise? You can actually take that survey and it will give you a percentage score. It's all hand on heart, you know, dib, 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 dob, 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 Scouts honour. This is what I'm doing. And it gives you a little guide as to how close you're getting toward a social entrepreneur's model.
Thanks, Elise. So there's another question here that's just popped in, and please, if you can, use the Q&A function and we'll get these questions recorded and answered. So the question is, what is the best way to communicate our impact goals as a startup?
Ooh. So your intention, stating your intention. So often as a startup, you have your business model canvas. Hopefully you can readdress your business model canvas if you haven't already got one in the social capabilities as well. So that business model canvas is pretty common for businesses that addresses your income, you know, your very simple incomes, outcomes, resources and those sorts of things. When it comes to the social version of it, there's a few more boxes to fill out to express your intentions. Then working with your theory of change, this is what we want to do. This is what our intention is, and stating that transparently. So if you can get that designed up, or you can make it, you know, like at least a simple flow chart to say, these are the things that we want to achieve. Often that's the best place to start, is just have the intention. And then you've designed your business to create that. So your first steps you may not actually be making much of a profit. Let's be real, in startup world. So when you're looking at that 50% of profits, there may not be any profits at that startup stage, but the intention is there. And as social enterprise peak body, we are very accepting of that. If you've got a website, if you've got an intention to do that, we bring you in. And even if you can't, if you're not quite there yet, coming on board as an associate member, you can actually get some of those tools and tricks and tips and online support mechanisms to help you stand up in that space as a startup.
Thanks,
Does that answer the question?
I believe, well, For me, it answers the question. And look, I would also like to add that Queensland government for procurement and grant processes, our standard is that 50% of the income must go towards towards the impact of the organisation, which leads nicely into the next question. What is the risk to a social enterprise if they publicly showcase their impact goals, as is on a website, but they don't hit close to their targets? Is that frowned upon?
Yeah, look, everything changes, doesn't it? And those conditions may be external. So, you know, you may not have been able to meet your targets because of the externals. It's about the iterative process. Nothing's frowned on. It's just, okay, so how do we change this? What happened? Be forensic in your investigation around what happened. And if you say, at the end of that forensic operation, you go, actually, we just bought ourselves a new Lamborghini. That's why we couldn't meet our targets. Yeah, that's pretty much frowned on. So there won't be any Lamborghinis for you. So I guess it really depends on the situation, but we are very, as a movement, we understand that sometimes the changes we really want to see are not achievable in that first year. You might need to extend your time frame out. It might be that, you know, this is a 5-year goal. We're on our way, but we're not there yet. You get to the 5 years, what happened? Can we look ourselves in the eye and say, does something need to change with our model? Does something need to change with our impact statements? Do we need to address our cohort? Is the cohort actually, if you're having those proper listening, deep listening conversations with the cohort that you're working with, they might need to have some adjustments that you need to make at your end so that you're changing to meet the needs and the conditions of the people that you're working with. So it's a deep listening exercise. Impact measurement is not a simple buy it out of a box and boom, here we go. It's iterative. You need to keep working on it. It's continuous improvement. Can we improve this marker? So if we want to get to 10 people who are homeless into housing and we only got 8, what happened? Can we address this? Was it a housing shortage? Was it a placement option? Was it less referrals than we thought? How do we improve our referrals? So there's some real power in being flexible and adaptable and to change your model to suit the conditions.
Thank you, Elise. A couple more questions and then we'll call it off. There's a question around, is it 50% of business income, aka total revenue, or 50% of the profits, aka income after business expense?
That's contestable. I love these sorts of curly questions, Michael. Social traders will be able to help you work through those issues. So it really is, once you get your profit in, you make sure that you've got your expenses being paid, make sure that your staff are being well paid, or, you know, however you want to manage your outputs. Then it's the profit at the end of that you sort of can then see, and it's not just profit either. So this is the tricky bit. So yes, it's the profit, but it's also the embedded impact that you're creating along the way. So it may not be that you need to have a whole 50% of that profit reinvested. It might be that you've got 30% here, but 20% of your wages or 20% of your impact that you're creating is actually embedded in the business model that you've got. So there's a mix. And my best advice is really to start and embark on social trader certification, because they will go through your books audited and they will actually make sure that you're coming out trumps. Or giving you feedback that, no, you need to improve on this X, Y, and Z. The benefit of QSEC is that we don't certify, and we just work with you and we introduce you to people who can help you. So it's not, you can join the QSEC social enterprise movement without having the stringent auditing process, just with a hand on heart and dib, scouts honor, this is what I'm trying to do. We encourage everyone to go through a social traders certification. It's free for the first year. we encourage everyone to do that because it really does test the veracity of your business model and what you're actually doing with impact in terms of embedded impact, as opposed to earned revenue and then your profits going back into the purpose. It's a very good question, and it's not a simple one to answer. So there's more work to be done in that space.
Look, there's still a few more questions, and we'll try and follow them up. But there's one that I think is probably worthwhile asking, and it's around the what are your thoughts around B Corp framework and how it relates to measuring and managing impact for a social enterprise? Plenty of business impact models and tools to quantify change.
Yeah, and B Corp's great. However, I will say, and a lot of our social enterprises do actually end up being B Corp certified as well. I will say though, B Corp is it's a certification process which measures what you're doing, but it's not about the impact you're creating as a business. So it's very much about brand and about value from external forces looking in. My concern, not concern, but my question for B Corp as a model is to ask them how people like Unilever and Nescafe could be B Corp certified. Like, I have serious questions about that, but the B Corpers that I know are awesome. So there's I look to social enterprises like the gold standard because the impact is embedded into the DNA of the business, whereas B Corp, it doesn't have to be. It can just be about your outputs and about the things that you're doing, the actions that you're taking. It doesn't need, and if it's good enough, then that's great, but it doesn't need to be embedded. So, I think Ben & Jerry's was a B Corp certification process that they went through. They actually ended up selling their business. They went down a completely other path, and the B Corp status just was sold with the business. So it's just a matter of quantifying the actions. I think with social enterprise certification, it's a lot more about the impact that's embedded into the business model itself, the DNA of the business model. B Corp is very much about the expression of that externally and what you're actually doing to improve your practices around things like the CO2 emissions, the carbon emissions efficiencies, things like that. And that's not taking in a holistic approach to the systems change approach. It's about my business and how I can have my point of difference being celebrated, rather than my business difference is actually creating the systems change I want to see to make a just and equitable world. I don't know if that's clear enough. I probably should run a whole session on it, shouldn't I? Just about the differences between B Corps and social enterprises. They're linked, but they're different.
All right. Look, there's a couple of other questions, but we are actually running out of time. There was one around what are the resources, tools, mentorship and incentives or subsidies provided by federal, state government, and where to gather information about it. Look, there's probably two primary sources. One is QSEC, the QSEC website. Elise and her team are across pretty much everything that's available out there. And I would also direct you to the Queensland government site called business.qld. It's actually got a lot of information on it, particularly for startups. And I will make a plug here for the Mentoring the Growth program. We have a number of very good mentors. It's a free program, and we have a number of very good mentors that are actually QSEC members, providing mentorship on establishing or starting up social enterprises. So it's worthwhile having a look at.
There's a drop down. There's actually a drop down that Desbert has put on that Mentor for Growth program. So if you're identifying yourself as a social enterprise, they will try and match you with a social enterprise mentor. So that's a really good mechanism.